Welcome to Rise Church. Welcome to those of you that are watching from home right now. We're glad you're joining us as well. We are starting off a new series today, so it's a good time to join us. And we're calling it Life as Mission. Life as Mission. You see, there's a lot of ways that God actually calls us very clearly to live our lives in such a way where it is a mission. And sometimes there's this thing that happens where we find it difficult to love those who are different from us, or we find it difficult to love those who maybe make us uncomfortable in some way. Sometimes we need a perspective shift in that area, and I think that's what God is going to do today. Today I want to address an issue that I believe is going to be close to many of your hearts, and I would imagine that this is a true statement, that every person in this room today, every person watching today, really does want to make a difference in this area in some way, but sometimes it's hard to know how. And you know, a lot of times we use language like, well, let's help the poor and let's help those in need, and you know, we want to do more than help the poor, and how do we do that, and all this stuff. And so today we're actually talking about raising up the poor. And what does that actually look like from a biblical perspective? And you know, before I get into this, I know that many of you today are even struggling in this area in some way. And the reality is that there are actually people right in our own backyard and in our own neighborhoods down the street from us, even in our own families, our own church, that are struggling financially. And some of you might even say, man, I'm in a really desperate place of need right now, and I don't know how I'm going to climb out of this. And then some of you, like me, have also probably been to developing nations, right? Third world countries. And you've seen poverty in a way that is very different from what we even see down the street from us today. Sometimes we call certain things poverty here in America, and then we go to another country and we see things that make us realize, oh, wow, it gets a lot tougher than we have it here. If you've ever been to a place like that, I have. Sometimes you find a house that's no bigger than some of your closets at home. Sometimes there's a sheet hanging over the door. Sometimes there's no windows or there's holes in the wall. Sometimes there's a bucket over in the corner of the room that people use for the restroom. Some of them have to walk miles and miles every day just to get clean water. Other times, there's 8 or 9 people living in a room that size, and it's tough. You know, many of us use the statement, man, there's nothing to eat in the refrigerator. They don't make that statement. They would never say that. They're just kind of hoping for a bag of flour, a bag of rice or beans or something to get them through the week, because it's very, very difficult. And so today, as I talk about this, whether it's poverty like that, or whether it's somebody in your family that lost their job and is unemployed and struggling to pay the bills, I want to talk about how do we as the church raise up the poor. Because as we'll get to in a minute, it is something that every single one of us is called to, no matter who you are. What's really interesting to me is that in Matthew chapter 25, I'm going to hit on this particular passage every week for the next few weeks, because in a few weeks we're going to do something called the Matthew 25 Challenge. So watch for that. And I'm going to issue a challenge to all of you based on this passage. But I'm just going to touch it briefly today. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story. He tells a parable about what it will be like when he finally returns for his people. And he basically says, I'm going to separate those who are mine from those who are not mine. And I'll speak to those who are mine, the sheep. He calls them sheep. And he says this. He says, I'm going to tell them, hey, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was homeless, you gave me a place to stay. And those who belong to him, the sheep, it says, will respond to him. When did we do this? Jesus, we never gave you clothing when you didn't have it. We never gave you a drink when you were thirsty. We never fed you. You haven't been here physically for the last however long. And when did we visit you? And Jesus says his reply will be in Matthew 25:40, if you want to follow along, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. I want you to imagine that for a moment, that whenever you use what you have on this earth to raise somebody else up who has something that they need, you are actually ministering and blessing Jesus himself. That's what Jesus is saying there. Can you imagine that? Like, that's how special it is to be used in this way by God himself. That's why in Proverbs 19:17, it says this, if you help the poor, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. That's a big deal. So you're literally serving God by serving people who are in need. And then 1 John 3, we're going to jump to, verses 17 and 18. This is a verse that I think could stun a lot of people into silence. I want you to hear the intensity of these words. John says, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need and has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Those are some strong words. That's strong language, right? Let me read it again. He's saying, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need and does not have any pity on them, the love of God is not in them. He goes on to say, dear children, let us not love with words, not just with words and speech, but how should we love? He says, with actions and in truth. So in other words, we're not going to just say when we see needs, oh, someone should do something about that. That's not what the church is called to respond like. We're not just going to say, oh, maybe someday I'll do something about that. Maybe we could do something. We're not just going to talk about this. We're not going to even just pray about this. God calls us, the church, to be the hope of the world. He commands us to take the resources that we're entrusted with, that he's put within our care, under our management, and to use it to love others out of poverty and into a place of wholeness. So then the question becomes, and this is the question that's asked all over the place right now, how do we do this? How do we do this in a way that's effective? How do we do this in a way that actually makes a difference and produces something? And I believe that we all want this. I would hate to think that there's a heart in this room that doesn't want to raise people out of poverty. That would not be a good heart. That would be contrary to what God's heart is like. I think that every one of us wants to do something. We care about it in some way. But the problem is, I think a lot of times in this issue, a lot of us just don't know what to do. We don't know what to do, and we don't know how to do it or how to get it right. And so here's where I'm coming from today, in hopes of getting it right. And I'm not even guaranteeing you I have it right, but in hopes of getting it right, based on what God's word says, I want to kind of build a foundation today to get our mind around this idea. So first, let's talk about poverty for just a minute. There's a lot of different definitions of this, but there's a book that I read years ago. I've read it 2 times because it was so impactful to me, and it's called When Helping Hurts. Impactful book in my life. It'll empower you with knowledge and to make a difference in the way that you raise people up. And there's a lot of interesting information in there. So one of the things in this book that the authors say, which I think is very interesting, is they try to define poverty. What is poverty? And first, they did a bunch of research and they figured out, how do the majority of Americans define poverty? And this is how they define it: as a lack of something material. Okay? A lack of something material is how most people in America define poverty. So if I asked most of you, what is poverty? That would mean that the majority of you would respond, well, it's when somebody doesn't make enough money to survive, or it's when they're in danger of losing their home, or they can't get housing, or they can't get clean water, or they don't have good health care. Those are the responses that would come from many people in our country. Your 8th grader might say, well, we're in poverty because my parents can't afford to get me an iPhone, or whatever. That's the culture we live in. How you see it is probably coming from where you are and where you live and how you've grown up. But the truth is, they've studied this, most Americans would say that poverty is lacking something material. On the flip side of this, don't miss this, they surveyed a group of over 60,000 people in lower income countries, okay? Over 60,000 people, that's a good sampling. And this is how those people defined poverty. They defined poverty as a mindset. As a mindset. Now, I'm not projecting that onto them, guys. This is what the majority of 60,000 people in those countries defined it as. I'm telling you what they said, okay? They never said it was lacking something material. I can't afford that pair of jeans, or I can't afford this house or these sneakers. They never said that. It was the way they think. And so here's what they said, some of the things they said over and over and over again in this research. Again, I'm telling you what the majority of them said. I'm not projecting this. They said that their life includes a deep sense of shame, that's what they feel from it. Like, I feel ashamed that I can't do more, that I can't make it out of this situation. They said that there's an ongoing feeling of worthlessness. They used the word fear in their answers over and over and over again. They used the word humiliation. They used the word hopeless again and again. A sense of being trapped. In other words, it's not like, hey, I wish I could afford a vehicle or whatever. It's not that. It's I don't know how the heck I'm going to get out of this. I don't have access to education. I don't have access to transportation. Some days I wonder if I'm even going to have food. I don't have any hope. The hopelessness is what's breaking through there. And, I just need to try to feed my family today. It's a mindset. It's not simply that they're lacking something material. And so what we need to understand as the church, as we address this issue, if we really want to help people that are struggling, we need to understand that we don't just need to give somebody what they need to get through the day. That's not enough. We need to help change the way that people think. And we need to give them a hope that actually changes them from the inside out. And I don't know if you know this, but there's only one answer to that. We need to really help turn a mindset from a sense of hopelessness to a place of hope in the one place that you can actually get real hope, which is Jesus Christ. So as the church, what we want to do is we want to give and we want to participate in this issue in a way that helps, but not in a way that hurts. And see, the problem many times is that we as Americans, we often think that we know what helps, but we often instead do things in a way that hurts. Like the church, for example, that went to a third world country and they brought hundreds of t-shirts to bless this village with. And they travel into this village and they line up, and all the kids line up for free t-shirts, and they're excited and they're happy, and there's joy on those kids' faces, and they thought they were helping. Days later, they find out that there's 3 women in that village that their livelihood depends on their t-shirt making business that they started. And those women couldn't feed their families this week. See, often we go into something like this with really good intentions, but because we don't have conversations with the people in need, the result might not be as helpful as we think it will be. There's a story in the book, I remember, I might get some of the details wrong, but the general concept is that there was a team from America that also went into one of these countries in Africa, and their goal was to build this bridge because the people were walking way downriver to get across in order to get the supplies that they need on a weekly basis. So we're going to go in and build a bridge. And so they literally went over there with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they built a bridge. And then what happened was the seasons changed, and the water shifts in this particular part of the world. The bridge was no longer over the water. And so they went to the people and they said, why didn't you tell us that? They said, we didn't know what you were doing here. You didn't talk to us. You didn't ask us where the bridge should be. You didn't have a conversation with us. A lot of times when we come in to help somebody, that is our heart and that is our intention. But sometimes, again, not all the time, but sometimes without knowing it, we're actually insulting certain people in the process. Also, not empowering them to rise up, which they really want to. I'll give you a more personal example real quick, and then I'll also give you an example that has to do with churches sending mission teams out to other countries, okay? I've personally seen both of these examples happen and both of these stories. And so chances are maybe you've done something similar to this. I've been there. I know people that have been there. Let's say, because we do something like this every year, let's say that you decide every year to adopt a family at Christmas time. So you want to find a family in need at Christmas time, and you want to give them the Christmas that they can't afford. And so you go out and you buy all these gifts, and you find out what they want, and then you go and you show up. And again, this is not a bad thing. We do this every year, but we do it very strategically in a certain way. What I've seen a lot of people do, and I've been there as well, and I saw the damage that it did instead of the help, is you show up with all these gifts, and you walk into these people's house around Christmas time as the hero. So you come in as the hero and you bring more gifts than these people could ever afford, that could even fit in their living room, by the way. And then if you look over at the dad, you'll notice that he's typically sitting there on the couch feeling some emotions that you might not be aware of. Because what he's experiencing during that time in his heart is, dang it, these people from the outside came into my family and provided something that I wasn't able to provide. And I'm ashamed of that. And I've had conversations with these guys. And not only are they providing something and making him feel that shame, but he's also thinking, by the way, next year when they don't do this, I still might not be able to do this, and now my kids are expecting this when they were grateful for what I was able to do for them last year. I'm just trying to give you a picture of some of the things to think about as you go into these situations, that sometimes we need to help people strategically instead of just haphazardly or casually like we know everything that they need. What if we instead anonymously gifted that family or privately gifted that family so that they could be the heroes to their kids instead of us trying to get all the credit for the generosity. That changes the game a little bit. And by the way, this kind of thing happens all around the world with mission teams as well. A mission team goes into a third world country, doesn't actually ask what's really needed there or what's the best way they can help. But they go in, they bring all this stuff in that they think the people need, and they get all the warm fuzzies for handing it out, and then flying back home, they go back to a very different life for the rest of the year. And I'm not a big fan of short-term missions for that reason. I'm a fan of long-term relationships in these countries where we either establish those or we partner with mission organizations who already have those established so that we know that that connection is happening all year long, not just a week where some people go and think they're helping and then leave and they don't think about them again. See, that's why I love Operation Christmas Child, which we do here every year. Because Operation Christmas Child is set up in the opposite way from that. Instead of us, or even the organization of Samaritan's Purse, going into all these countries at Christmas time and delivering these gifts and being the heroes, they deliver them to the local churches in all of those communities that then get to be the heroes because they're the ones that are going to be reaching these families with the gospel of Jesus Christ for the rest of the year. And that's why we support them. You see the difference? There's a difference between just throwing this stuff out there randomly because it feels good or it feels generous and strategically, truly helping to empower and equip in order to bring long-term transformation. Those are two different things. So here's one of the things that we have to recognize if you're taking notes. Brokenness, in many ways, is actually at the root of all poverty. And I'm going to explain that. We need to understand that brokenness is at the heart of that. And by the way, all of us are broken in some way. All of us are impoverished in some way. The root of every type. And I'm not just talking about material poverty here. Material poverty is a very basic definition of poverty. There's other types of poverty. There's relational poverty. There's spiritual poverty. There's all different types of poverty. Some of you, for example, if you walked into a third world country, if you haven't been before and you haven't seen this type of thing before, you're going to think as you walk around, oh my gosh, they don't have anything. This is so sad, they don't have anything. But if you look around and you study them a little bit and you get to know them, what you're going to find in many of those communities is instead of, oh my gosh, they don't have anything, you're going to realize, oh my gosh, but they have a greater sense of community and they love each other better than we do back home. They're not necessarily experiencing relational poverty. I think more people in this country experience that. There's all different types of poverty. And again, the root is all brokenness. A lot of it starts with the brokenness of our relationship with God, right? When Adam and Eve sinned against the world and the world became tainted by sin, broken. So now we live on a broken planet. It's also a result of brokenness of ourself, our relationship with ourself, our understanding of our identity. So many of us deciding that we are something that somebody else tells us we are, or what we think we are instead of what God says we are. Having bad self-esteem, or I don't feel like I have what it takes. I don't recognize that I'm born in the image of God, and I actually have access to His power within me. And I feel like I just don't have what it takes to better myself or do this or do that. I just feel hopeless in all that I do. That's a broken relationship with how you see yourself. It's also the result of broken relationships. And that's kind of a two-sided thing. Like, in other words, if you have a specific need in your life, but because you also have a pride issue, you're too ashamed to come to me and ask for help with that need, then it's the result of a broken relationship that your need's not met. On the flip side of that, if I have the means to meet your need and I don't notice that need because I'm not close enough to you and I'm just in my self-absorbed little world living my little life, that's a broken relationship. And so I'm not meeting that need for you. See, it's all tied to brokenness in some way. And that's why it was so life-changing, guys, when Jesus rode into Nazareth and he opened the scroll and he read from the book of Isaiah. And this is recorded in the New Testament in Luke chapter 4, but Jesus is actually reading words written many, many years before from the prophet Isaiah. And he says this, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind. He sent me to set the oppressed free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then if you go a couple of verses later, he basically says, and guys, today is the fulfillment of those verses. And you know what he's talking about? He's talking about him. He's saying, I am the fulfillment of what was written back then by the prophet Isaiah. He's saying, that's me. I came to bring good news to the poor. I came to set the prisoners free. I came to recover sight for the blind. The point is, Jesus heals the brokenhearted. Jesus is the one who sets us free. The root is brokenness, and Jesus is the one who binds up the brokenhearted. And when we understand that at its root, all these types of poverty are more a mindset than simply the basic understanding of lacking something material, that it's from the root of brokenness and that Jesus is the answer, that changes how we as the church try to raise up people from poverty. So again, as the church, we are called by God to this, and we need to understand that as followers of Jesus, every single one of us is called to raise up the poor. Every one of us. That includes you, that includes me. We are called to this by God. So then, again, we return to the question, how do we do this? How do we live this out? I don't understand how we can make a difference here. What do we do when there's a guy on our street that needs money? What do we do when we cross somebody downtown that needs a place to stay? You know, what do you do when someone in your small group loses a job and they're afraid of not being able to pay their bills? What do you do in these types of situations? What do you do when you recognize some global need that we all hear about where, oh my gosh, for X number of dollars, we could actually provide clean water to an entire village, and it's not as much as you might think? What do you do when for X number of dollars we could build a school in this community that raises up Christian leaders in this other country? What do you do when for this amount of money we could send medicine to this place, or we could send mosquito nets to this place? Or, you know, what do you do when you're overwhelmed with some need and your heart aches for it, but you just don't know how to meet it? So I'm going to share a couple of closing thoughts with you. I'm going to go through them pretty quick. And I think this is kind of a good foundation for us to see how Jesus would have us respond to this. And the first thing is this, don't miss this. We're called to serve people, not save people. I think it's dangerous and insulting to think that we are somebody's answer. We are not the answer. Jesus is the answer. We are the servants, okay? Let me say that again. We are not the answer. Jesus is the answer. We are the servants. We serve people. Jesus saves people. That needs to be understood. So then the question is, okay, we're the servants. How does he want us to serve? And this is really important, guys. So I'm going to break it into two ideas. This is language that I've heard used for decades. I love this language. I use it behind the scenes here a lot in a lot of the missional things we do here at Rise. I want you guys to understand it and hear it so you can start using the same language, because it's very important that we understand both of these things and that they both matter equally, especially as the church. How do we serve others? There's two ways: relief and restoration. And those are two different things, relief and restoration. They're different but equally important. And every church needs to be doing both, okay? So let me define those for you. Relief. Relief is immediate, temporary help during a crisis. Immediate, temporary help during a crisis. It's immediate and it's temporary. It's not going to be ongoing. That's relief. Ongoing is something else. I'll get to that in a minute, okay? So, for example, globally, a tornado wipes out a neighborhood, or a hurricane wipes out a village, or a typhoon comes and wipes out something, or whatever. In your world, it might be somebody you know loses a job. That's a crisis. Or a family member comes to you and says they have stage 4 cancer. Someone gets hit by a car and they're in the ICU, someone that you care about. These are all crises. So relief needs to be provided by us, the church, okay? Immediately, and it's temporary, to try to help and sustain them through this crisis. Some examples of some of the things we do here for relief: the food distribution we've been doing for the last year, the food pantry we've established here in the building to help people that need last-minute food, the benevolence fund, which you can give to, where we help meet people's needs if they're hurting and struggling, Safe Families, where we partner with them and provide resources where if a parent ends up in jail or ends up in the hospital and they don't have any support around them because they're here in our city alone, then Christ-following people from the church can take their kids in temporarily until they get their situation figured out, instead of having those kids go into the system. We help with that. crisis response, which our pastors do quite a bit of that, hospital visitation, providing meals for someone in a crisis. This is just touching the surface. I'm giving you some examples of how we as the church need to conquer relief. Okay, so now then there's restoration. Restoration is a little different, but just as important, if not more. Restoration is a long-term relationship to rebuild wholeness. A long-term relationship to rebuild wholeness. Okay, so here's an example. The tornado hits, the hurricane comes, and there's all the news coverage of it and a lot of attention. And by the way, the news gives that a lot of attention for like a week. When that week's over, they're still in crisis. They still have not rebuilt their lives, but the news moves on to somebody else. The church needs to stay. Somebody has a crisis here in the city of Visalia that we don't know, or someone in our church body has a crisis that we know, a relational crisis, a financial crisis, a health crisis, whatever that might be. We respond immediately, but after a week, like many of us do, we don't just leave them there. We continue that long-term relationship to help them rebuild what was lost. That's what we're called to as the church. The church needs to stay. We help people rebuild their lives, okay? So, for example, we provided relief. We got you to a hotel. We got you some food. We put new clothes on your back, okay? Now, what do we need to do with you and for you while your house is being rebuilt or while you're now finding where you're going to live? What do we do when a whole city needs to be rebuilt as the church? That's restoration. Somebody's been living in relational poverty for years, okay? They lose a loved one, and it just completely rocks their world. They're depressed, they're feeling down. It's like everything they care about's been ripped away from them. That's how they're feeling when they lost that loved one, okay? How does the church respond? We show up immediately. We pray over them. We love on them. We provide a warm hug, a shoulder to cry on. Maybe we provide meals for the next 2 weeks so they don't have to think about that while they grieve. That's relief. Restoration, we're not just going to drop you after that 1 or 2 week. Okay, now we're talking about how can we, because you were living in relational poverty, how can we now connect you to the body? How can we get you connected to the church family, which you were always meant to be connected to? By the way, here's a tip for you. People that call the church office every time there's a crisis, that's not a bad thing. Please keep doing it. We're here and we love to be there for you. But when the first call is the church office, instead of somebody in the church, you're living in relational poverty. You're not connected to a small group, or you're not connected to, because most people that have a small group, their first call is to the people in their small group. And they're doing life together every week, and they're connected in that way, and they pray over each other every week, and they know each other's needs every week, even more than some of us do. And that's how the church is designed to be, because, the 3 pastors on staff can't handle hundreds and hundreds of needs at the same time. The church is meant to handle needs. The church is meant to be the church. I mean, essentially, this is what the Good Samaritan did, right, for the Jewish man when he found him beaten and bloodied by the side of the road, right? He did relief and he did restoration. So he finds the guy, he's near death. It says he put some oil on his wounds. Here's some bandages. Let me do what I can help to make you survive. And then what he did, it says, is he put him on his donkey and basically took him to like a bed and breakfast. And he said, I'll pay for this. Get healed, get healthy. He said, I have to go take care of some business, but I want you to know I'm coming back. See, it wasn't just relief. I'm coming back to check on you. I'm coming back to help you now rebuild from where you're at, to rebuild your life. I'm going to provide relief and restoration. And if I can just talk for a minute, kind of side note here. This is why we have a place to give here at Rise Church called Love Our City. And this is the fund that we've established where we use this fund to meet these kinds of needs, to help those who are struggling, to give them hope, to distribute food, to help those that might be under stress. It's what we use to do these types of things, the relief and the restoration. And when you give to the Love Our City Fund at Rise Church, you can know that 100% of that money is going to these things that Jesus cares about. When you give to Love Our City, you're directly supporting things like my Father's house. here in Visalia, which if you're not familiar with my Father's house, you're not, because they don't brag about it or go around trying to be a public entity or famous. But they have over 100 beds here in Visalia between 10 homes, and every single bed is taken at all times. People coming off of drugs, people coming out of jail, people coming off the streets are in these beds in these homes. And by the way, did you know that they have an over 85% rate of the people that go through those homes end up not only with their own job afterward, but with their own apartment and their own vehicle? It's a ridiculously successful program here in Visalia where they're doing it the way God said to do it. And my point is, it's strategic. It's not just throwing money at stuff. It's very thought out, and it works because they do it this way. And they're very, very good at it. And so my point is, one of the things that we provide here is we vet all of these things that we partner with, and we have people that have spent hours researching them, interviewing them, figuring out what are the things in our city and beyond that are the most effective, that are using the money the most wisely and getting the most fruit out of it. And those are the things that we as a church support through that fund. My point is, we can't just be casual and not think through this stuff. Instead, what we want to do is we want to give to those who are producing the most fruit, so that we can get the most investment from God's money, because we're accountable to how we manage that, and we are to be investing into the kingdom of God. That's also my strategy and my wife's strategy when we help somebody personally. We like to be strategic about it. Are we going to get the most help here, or are we hurting somebody in some way? Think about it ahead of time, not in the moment when you're approached. Okay, the next thing. We're also called to relate with people, not rescue people. Okay, I want to throw that out there. This is important. We're called to relate to them, to love them, to care for them, to be in relationship with them. Don't miss this, because this is one of the most important things many of you in the room might hear today. Those who are struggling in this world are not your projects to help. They are people to love. They are people to love. And when you see them that way, it changes everything. Everything starts to change. Let me say it this way. There will be a time, and there already has been, there will be a time where I need help. There will be a time where I am struggling in some big way, where I need help from somebody and support from somebody. There will be a tragedy in my life. Mark my words. There will be a hurt. There will be something that happens big in my life, and I will need somebody. I don't want to be your project in that moment. I want to be somebody that you genuinely love. And that's why we return that to those that are struggling when we're the ones helping. We don't see them as projects. We see them as people that we need to be loving. See, the mistake that I think a lot of Christians and churches make a lot of the time is we go into another country, or we go into a neighborhood or a school or a city or whatever, and we go in and we try to help in the way that we think is most helpful. And we even do some incredibly cool things when we do that, right? Some generous things, some amazing acts of service, all this stuff. So what's the mistake then? That all sounds good. It's not bad. But the mistake we make is when we don't actually get to know the people that we're serving. And that is a drastic mistake that we make all the time. If we don't talk to anybody, if we never ask them, what are you saying would make your life better? What are you saying would actually help this situation? Then we're not getting the accurate information. And we can be wrong a lot of the times. For example, even in our own city, sometimes a church will do this thing where, we go to a city street. We pick a block or a neighborhood, and we're going to go in and clean it up. So we go in and pick up all the trash on that street, and we go knock on doors and offer to mow people's lawns that are unkempt and stuff like that, which is all good. That's nice. But sometimes, if we had gotten to know the people first, if we had actually had real conversations with them, we might have heard some different stories. Like we might have heard the guy that lives on that street who's 22 years old, who struggled with drugs all through his teenage years. And he skipped school because of that, and he was in juvie for part of that. And so now he's in this position where he can't read, and his biggest need is to learn to read so he can get a better job and provide for his family. We would have known that if we talked to them. You might have talked to the woman who said, man, if I could just get some counseling to break some of my destructive habits and have somebody help me through that, that would make a big difference. If we talk to the people on the street, you might hear another person saying, man, I'm just so lonely. I just feel like I don't have people around me, like a solid group of people that I can connect with on a weekly basis who can like guide me through life a little bit. Hello? Those are things we can provide. But if we don't have conversations to get to know the people, then we don't know what we need to provide. You know, as nice as it is, if we talk to people on that street, they probably would not say, man, if we just had a little less trash on our street and our lawns mowed once a week out of the year, that would really change our lives. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's a bigger deal than I think, but I just feel like there's better ways to help, and I think if we got to know people, they could tell us that. See, what we should do is include the people we're trying to help in the process rather than just assuming that we know their greatest struggles. And guys, when people are involved in the process, bigger things start to happen. They bring what they have to the table, which we might not have even known they have. They take ownership. They take some pride in some of it because they're participating in life change and transformation. Some of the stuff that we go in and help them accomplish might even continue past 1 week because they're involved in the process. So here's some questions that I think we need to ask more when trying to help and serve people. What can we do to help you accomplish your dreams? What can we do to help you have a better life? What are your greatest struggles? What are your greatest needs? In other words, we're never going to do for someone else what they want to participate in. Involve them in the process. Final thought, and this is a big one too. We are called to reach out, not down. Let me explain the difference. We reach out because we care. We reach out because we love people. We never reach down because we're better than somebody else, because we're not. When we're reaching out, what we're essentially saying is, hey, I'm poor too in some way. I'm struggling too. I have problems too. I'm not the hero. I'm not above all the answers, and I'm not the answer. I'm reaching out simply because I love you and because I care about you as a person. See, we often do this thing in our culture, I think, where we like divide ourselves into two different demographics. There's the people that need help and the people who help. No, guys, we're all both. Every single one of us. Every person in here, from me to you, needs help, and every single person's called to help. We're both. We offer help because we follow Jesus. We need help because we're human. There's a guy years ago that I'm pretty close to now, and there was a time where he was going through something difficult in his marriage. And at that time, the area he was struggling with in his marriage was an area where Amy and I were really strong. And so I was able to, in his time of struggle and need, go in and meet that need and provide him with some tips and some wisdom and some advice and some support and just walk with him through that. And now they have this really solid marriage. Okay, I saw a need. He asked for help. I helped him out. That's all there is to it. I helped him because I care. But I'm not above him. My marriage isn't better than his. I'm not the hero. Several years later, we're planting a church. And it was a difficult time for me. And there was a season where there was a lot of pain and there was a lot of struggle and there was a lot of just stuff coming against me in ways that made me just want to quit. He sees that need. I ask for him because he had more experience in this area. He comes in and he gives me the counsel and the support and walks me through all that stuff. And by the way, that's part of why our church is even here today. Our ministry is different. Our church is different. Our marriages are different. Neither of us are better than the other one. But I helped him when he was poor, and he helped me when I was poor. That's how you live life as mission. That's how you love your neighbor. We don't ever swoop in as the heroes reaching down. We are always fellow brothers and sisters in Christ reaching out. We reach out because we care and because we love. And so, again, Rise Church, by the way, has community partners that we partner with that are doing stuff where they're knocking it out of the park. And they're doing it so well, and there's so much fruit growing off their trees. And they're pre-selected. And we do it this way because we don't feel that we have to be this church that goes out there and starts everything from scratch when there's already people doing it who are brothers and sisters in Christ anyway and doing a great job. So we don't go out there and start a homeless shelter, even though it's a need. We partner with those who have a homeless shelter who are doing a dang good job. And we resource them, and we fund them, and we volunteer with them, and we support them and walk with them, and they get to be the heroes. It's okay. We don't need to start everything ourselves. We go and find somebody who's doing it well, and we partner with them. So the next time that you have a desire, here's what I'm saying, to do something in our community or in the world, ask one of us. Or ask somebody in your small group who might know, or ask one of our elders. You'll find that we're involved in way more things than you think, and there's opportunities to get involved and get dirty out there in the community, loving on people. And it's what we're called to do as the church. I'm going to tell you about one that we have here today in just a few minutes. So in closing, the band's going to come back up now. What I learned in many situations in my life is when you give from the right heart and in the right ways, you often end up receiving so much more back than you even gave. And that's how we do it. We love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we love our neighbor as ourselves. And by the way, we have poor neighbors right next door, and we have poor neighbors across the sea, and we're poor in different ways. And so we freely give and we freely receive. And that's how we love one another, and that is how we live life as mission. I'm going to pray for you guys. Father, we just ask that you would raise up every person in this room as your church, that we would just get this right in our communities, that we would get this right around the world. And God, I don't know if I said this all correctly. I did my best, but God, I pray that you would use these words today just to impact hearts, to spur people on toward loving each other in the way that you call us to. God, I pray that every person in this room would start to begin their day, each day without skipping, with a simple prayer where they ask you to show them how you see the people they come in contact with. May that be our prayer every day this week. God, whoever I come in contact with today, no matter how much I like them or no matter how annoying they are, would you show me how you see them? Would you show me them through your eyes so that I could love them in the way that you love them? God, may we be your representatives here in our city and beyond. God, I pray that the people of Rise Church would once again understand that this place we're in right now is not a church. This entity or organization called Rise Church is not a church. God, that 100% of the time that the Bible describes the church, it is the people of God. We are the church. So God, as we leave this place today, we're not leaving church. We are the church, and we're going out into our city and into the world, and we're called by you to serve others, not save them, to relate to them, not rescue them, and God, to make a huge difference in their lives. I pray that that would be true of us. And everybody who agreed said,